K&A Custom Crafts on Facebook.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to a special episode. It's not really the Bo and Joe Show. It's the Coast to Coast Entertainment Network special celebrating Black History Month. And of course, I'm honored to be here with my two co-hosts tonight. They're usually in my corner every night, but this is a special occasion. So welcome, Adrian and Bodine. How are you feeling about tonight? I'm excited, and we have some great guests lined up, and I'm looking forward to it.
We absolutely have some great guests lined up, and I broke my traditional rule with wearing blue. Went with a nice black shirt to celebrate this, our first annual Black History Month program. So I'm excited. Let's make it happen. How you doing, Ferris?
Doing well. Glad to have this off day Monday. That means something.
I was going to ask you if you had the day off. I forgot to ask you that.
Yeah, I get the day off, and but with what I do, I never have a day off. So I get messages and have to respond to things during the day. But been looking forward to this all day. So yeah, ready to hear some great stories and great content.
Well, we're definitely going to have that, no doubt about that.
So before we get started, I mean, I think it would be poignant if both of you express your personal views and thoughts on Black History Month, and maybe share some of your own perspective before we jump into the guests. Why is it significant to you, Adrian?
Well, it's significant to have a month dedicated to Black history. It speaks to the contributions that African Americans have made in this country for a very, very long time. And, the month is warranted. As a matter of fact, I just posted something probably about 45 minutes ago on a woman that is 100 years old, and she's part of a park ranger. She's a park ranger, and she worked in World War II, assisted during that time. I forget the exact name of the group, but just it's great because the contributions are endless when it comes to African Americans in this country in all aspects and all, in any way you can think, not just sports, which obviously is what we talk about a lot, but in every avenue in life in this country. So it's warranted, and it's great to have this every month. And you wish it didn't have to be a month, that it was just something that's recognized all the time. But it is what it is, and it's a great time. So glad we have it.
Agreed. What about you, Bodine?
Oh, it's about knowledge, education, continuous learning. When I started this process of writing my book, I went from focusing on Black history, not enough, but also it became an everyday, 24-hour, 7 days a week event, because of the research I had to do to make sure some of the content I was putting in my manuscript was correct. And I began to learn more and more and more and find out more information. I talked about in my book the Green Book, that I heard about my grandmother and elders in the church talk about, how people of color, African Americans, use the Green Book to travel. So they would find safe places to stay. And so it's just all about learning learning history, and believe it or not, it's not just, I mean, the majority of it is Black history, but when you also find out that our white allies are a part of that history because they had a lot to do with it, right? You know, I posted and will continue to talk about the relationship that Harriet Tubman had with Thomas Garrett, a Quaker, who created this supply house, right? Hardware store, better word for it, in Wilmington, Delaware. He moved from Pennsylvania to Wilmington, Delaware, which is not far. But back then, it was probably far. And he set up that store as a facade to give funds to Harriet Tubman for the Underground Railroad. He supplied her with money, supplies, shoes, clothing, tools, whatever she needed. So, you know, it's all about education and learning that our history is a shared history, especially the positive things that we have to share, right? So it's all about education, continuous learning. I wasn't as interested because I wasn't a history major in college, right? I was majoring in football, and when it came time to the light bulb to go off and say, okay, you're not going pro, you didn't turn your focus on your academics. So better late than never to learn as much as you can. And then when you have a dad who has a lot of experiences in the music world, he often shares some of his information and knowledge. So that's good.
So that's
what it's all about.
So speaking of Mr. Sanders, I want to welcome him to the show. Hi, Mr. Sanders. It's good to see you. We also have Sands here as well. Hi, San. It's good to see some representation from the Sanders family. We also have Justin here, of course. He's our main fan, our biggest supporter in any genre that we do. And you gentlemen know that I do a different program on the network dedicated to holistic health and just it's hosted with 3 other women, and this month, in honor of Black History Month, we are honoring one Black woman from history every week and one in who's currently changing the landscape. And it was interesting, Adrian, that you were speaking about the woman who was in her hundreds, but at the other end of the spectrum this week we recognized Ruby Bridges, who at just 6 years old, I love her story, just 6 years old, she was thrust into the spotlight when she was when she was the first Black child to desegregate an elementary school in Louisiana. And when she speaks about it today, I mean, she's still a civil rights activist. When she speaks about it today, she thought she was going to Mardi Gras. She said she lived in New Orleans. But I think about it, I have nieces who are 5 and young, and other friends who have young children. I just can't imagine what a 6-year-old girl being thrust into the limelight. And the story was that as she walked to school, she had to be escorted by federal marshals. One woman was escorted to the school every day. She would threaten to poison her. Another would hold up a coffin with a little Black baby doll in it. And what this poor little girl must have endured. And no teachers would teach her. Only one woman, who was actually from Boston, she taught her singularly and solely in a classroom for over a year and a half, as if she were speaking to an entire class. So I think that the gamut runs, and of course I'm drawn to women, but the gamut, you have someone 6 to 100, and how someone of any age can make a difference and impact the world in a positive way.
And we've come a long way, and we've got a lot of work to do as a country. But, we should celebrate the wins, right? Don't just celebrate, don't just moan the losses. Let's celebrate the wins, because wins mean something, right?
And I think,
right?
Yeah, Ruby is a win.
Right.
She's she embraces that period and speaks about the people who did help her as well. You know, people helped her family along the way, white people, Black people, and she's, you know, came out a victor and is appreciative of that time. So I think that that is a win, and she's still out there changing the world today.
There's a lot of DEI and a lot of stories that go way back into history. So we just have to find them and celebrate those stories, and that's what we're going to try to do tonight.
Well, that is so. So since we're celebrating, why don't we bring on our first guest? He's waiting in the wings, and we have Louis Allegra. We call him Lou, and Lou, following a 30-year career in leadership position. Well, let me bring him on first so he can appreciate his introduction, and we can say hi to him. So, hi, Lou, and welcome to the program. Before I'm going to hand the mic over to you and Bodine, I want to talk a little bit about your accomplishments and what it is that you do. Following a 30-year career in leadership positions within the automotive industry, you turned your attention to coaching CEOs and owners of businesses with at least $1 million in annual sales. 5 years ago, you entered retirement and joined SCORE Lehigh Valley to volunteer your time mentoring over 200 entrepreneurs, striving to launch and grow small businesses and create jobs, all while advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is our passion here in the workplace and in society in general. And last year, you were awarded an Outstanding Volunteer Award from the Northampton County in Pennsylvania. So welcome, and we appreciate you joining the show.
Thank you, Joe.
Welcome, Lou. Welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you, Bodine. Given the theme of Black History Month, I thought I would start by reading to you a post that I put on LinkedIn on Martin Luther King Day, about a month or so ago. And it just struck me that this was the right thing to do. So my post is, Dr. King, we heard you. For nearly 5 years, I've been a volunteer mentor with SCORE Lehigh Valley. I've done over 1,000 business mentoring sessions with hundreds of clients from all walks of life, rich and poor, high school diplomas, master's degrees, female, male, LGBTQ, Native American, African American, Asian American, European American, which is me, and Hispanic American. In all cases, we help our clients realize their dreams in their businesses and in their lives. It's a pleasure and a privilege to serve with over 10,000 SCORE volunteers across the country, all of us helping the dream come true.
And that is absolutely the perfect example of what DEI is about, helping everyone. And what SCORE is doing and the stories I've heard regarding what SCORE is doing, falls right into our wheelhouse, right? Helping folks live, giving folks an opportunity to provide a resource so they can live their dreams. So it doesn't matter what color you are, what religion you are, or where you're from. SCORE is across this country, and it's a free service, right? They're providing a free service for folks. So SCORE is now focused even more, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're focused even more regarding getting the message out there so folks who look like me can say, wow, there is a resource out there. Let me reach out to them and get the help that I need to grow my business. And so kudos to SCORE. It's a good thing.
Thank you, Bodine. Our vision, by the way, I've got a card that they gave us all when we onboarded. So this is 5 years old, but the vision says, our vision for SCORE National, every person has the support necessary to thrive as a small business owner. So a big part of what we do, and what I do because I'm the DEI advocate for our chapter, is the challenge is, how do we identify and communicate with all of the folks out there in underserved communities, don't have internet, don't have this, don't have that, don't have a job perhaps, or have a job and they're thinking about starting a business. We want to get the message to them that, yeah, you might be an excellent candidate for starting your own business in the United States, has to be in the US, and you have to employ people, of course, over time as you grow your business. So that's the main focus. And it's difficult to reach all of those folks. I did manage to reach a wonderful lady who's Native American, and she goes out. Bo, you might want to chat with her. She goes out and she gives talks on, she didn't call it DEI, but the Native American community and what's going on with the community. Doesn't make the newspapers, but there's still a lot of bad stuff going on. And we got to find a way to reach in there and make things right. Every community has its challenges, so we're all one. At the end of the day, we're all, as you said, well, we're all the same. Just the color of our skin could be green for that matter, but we're all human beings.
Absolutely. And the only time I turn green is when I drink tequila. So Joe, helpful hint, don't give me tequila because I'll turn into the Hulk.
All right. Well, I might do that, but I'm not going to be around yet. I'll let Adrian handle that one.
Ferris, you got a question or any comments? Uh-oh, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, just trying to be cordial there.
There you go.
So I was kind of taking a look at the site. Can you tell me about, so this is national, correct?
Correct.
It's a national program. So I'm seeing mentors. Can you tell me what a business mentor would do and how they would help a small business, and whether they're local or national, or how that would work?
Did he freeze?
He may have.
Well, until we get him back, the way it works is, Ferris, the way it works is you entrepreneur reaches out to SCORE, you complete a profile online, and then they assign you a mentor based on what services you need. So if you need some marketing services, if you need to learn how to put a business plan together, whatever it is you need, they will pair you up with a mentor who have that expertise. So that's how that works.
Okay.
Yeah. Are we going to be able to get Lou back?
Well, he came in a couple times. He came in and out, so hopefully he'll be able to join us. He'll click back in and join us.
Well, this is part of technology now, right? We've been in this space for 2 years, right?
And hopefully Sonia will. So hopefully our second guest will be joining us soon. I sent her the link as well. So, but in the meantime, how do you know Lou Bodine? I mean, what's your affiliation with one another?
Oh, one of my good friends who's with who I met many years ago from the chamber, the mainline chamber, John Dorso Jr. He and I have been friends for a long time when I used to work with the Blue and White Scholarship Foundation. And so he's always looking to introduce me to folks who can provide resources and contacts, and because you just never know when you're going to need someone. And he told me to reach out to Lou early on. Matter of fact, Lou was part of our first, January of 2021, we had a group of friends of mine got together, because there were 4 or 5 of us from different industries. And we decided to have a unconscious bias webinar. And Lou was invited and he attended, but he wasn't one of the panelists. So that was my first introduction to Lou. So, and then we became friends, and he has helped me tremendously, because one of the things I'm working on is putting together a business plan. So when the time comes, I can then use that to expand and grow my business as an author and speaker
Hey,
and
Adrian,
podcaster.
yeah. Adrian, I'm sorry, but my internet went out for a couple of seconds. You
Sure,
were
that's
asking,
okay.
you were asking a question, I think.
Well,
Go ahead.
I saw something on the website in reference to mentorship. So my question was, is that also national? Is it specific to need? How does mentorship work with the program?
Mentorship works starting with someone who is considering starting a business. Typically, most of my clients are thinking about starting a business, but our tagline is for the life of your business. So conception of an idea, planning to make it work, launching, growing, scaling, and successful exit. So SCORE can be with you for 30 years, 40 years, if you know, through the life of your business. The key and what I really focused on, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, was getting the word out. So mentoring is, we get the word out. You've been to the website, so that's how people apply. If they don't have a phone number or whatever, they go right to the website. And it'll ask you a few questions. Do you own a business? Do you want to start a business? What kind of help do you want? And the other thing is we're all listed in there. There are more than 10,000 mentors across the country. Every part of the country is covered. We're in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania, but I don't have to stay here. I mean, I physically stay here, but I've had clients from Seattle, Washington, from Texas, Florida. I have several from Florida. So the only advantage of getting a mentor in your own community is the mentor will have knowledge of, are there competitors that you're going to run into, or is it going to be tough to get a loan, you know, or that sort of thing. But it's nationwide, it's free, easy to apply for. There's nothing the only thing that would rule you out is if you are not working in the United States and starting a business in the United States. I actually got an application from a young man who gave his address as New York. And so I gave him a call, and it turns out he's in England, and he's like 16, 17 years old, and he wants to start a business in England, having to do with cryptocurrency. And I don't know anything about cryptocurrency, but
Me neither.
But he lied on his application, and so I'll say offline, not SCORE. I'll give you a few tips, but you can't. I can't be your SCORE mentor, nor can anybody else in SCORE for that matter. But otherwise, we're available to anybody, pretty much any time. There's actually a 24-hour service, 24-hour call service. So mentors will volunteer to take a day or a 24-hour period every once in a while. And there's a number that you can call. So you're running your business and something happens and you need an answer right away. You call that number, you get a mentor, and he or she will help you.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an amazing program. I knew about it before I before I moved back to Pennsylvania and saw the ad in the newspaper. So I knew it was a great program. And I had just come off my own business of coaching CEOs, as Joe described, in an organization called Vistage International. And to qualify as a client, you had to be a CEO or owner, or chief executive or owner, and you had to have annual sales of $1 million or more. So that was a whole different ballgame. And it wasn't mentoring, because these are people who didn't know everything, but they knew the basics of a business. Otherwise, they wouldn't get to be on top of $1 billion business. So it was more coaching. Hey, you know how to do this, and give them the courage to do it, or show them a different way to do it, or that sort of thing. And I made a good living off of that. It paid very well. Then I retired, moved. That was in Lexington, Kentucky. Retired, came back to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where we raised our family, and saw this. We're here just a few months. Saw the ad in the paper, SCORE mentor wanted, and that was 5 years ago. And here I am.
Sounds good.
Well, for
And
all those
and
folks,
I guess you don't have to be a new business. You can already be in business. It doesn't matter where you are in that aspect.
Yeah, any of those stages that I mentioned, and I've already had two or three, not already, but I've had two or three clients come to me saying, I want to sell, can I sell this business? How do I sell this business? If I sell it, how do I put a price on it, and so forth.
I needed to know you about a year and a half ago when I sold mine.
Yeah, so there.
That's great.
Well, as you know, there are different ways of valuing a business, so it's just a matter of educating him or her. And if I keep saying him, forgive me. I have more women as clients than I do men, and I'm not sure why that is, but I get a lot of referrals from people. And just so you know, I'm not going to be leaving SCORE. But my 5 year anniversary will come in April. And at the end of April, I'm going to stop mentoring because I've had over 200 clients in those 5 years, 1,612 sessions, 1,500 hours. So when you think about that and planning that, it takes 2-3 days a week away from anything else I might be doing. And as I said, I'm retired, and I'll keep my connection with SCORE in an emeritus position because I'll help them with DEI until another DEI person comes along. I'll share some things, tricks of the trade that I learned over the last 5 years. The other thing I'll do is casually, not as part of SCORE, but I'll make myself available if there's somebody said, well, how did you schedule? How did you get all those in and so forth? And I scheduled it like a professional practice, which really it is. It's just missing the money, but it's a professional practice. And I committed to mentoring on Tuesdays and Thursdays, mainly because Mondays and Fridays are often part of a weekend if you travel or something. And at the time I was in a hiking group, the Wednesday hikers, so I didn't want to give up my hiking. And it worked out well. I could do 5 or 6 sessions on Tuesday and 5 or 6 sessions on Thursday. So it could be average about 10 sessions a week. So I was really busy, but it gets in the way of, we want to do some traveling. One of our children is in Wisconsin, and we have a grandchild in Wisconsin, and we have a great grandchild in Wisconsin. And so that's a day's drive just getting out there. So we want to do that more often. A lot of places we want to visit in the States and elsewhere. I forgot to tell you about my military service, but I'm an Army veteran.
Thank you for your service. So am I.
Thank you. Wow, good for you. Where did you serve, Adrian?
Fort Riley, Kansas, Fort Hood, Texas, and Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Oh, okay. You're stateside the whole time.
Yeah, I'm a Gulf War veteran as well, but yeah, stateside
okay.
whole time.
Okay, glad to have you back.
Gulf War got me out of going to Panama, which I was a little upset about but
okay.
Life's life.
Well, I lucked out. I was stationed in Germany with the NATO forces helping fight the Cold War, which really meant we were cannon fodder in far western Germany, right across, and not too few miles away was the Russian border. So, but it was a good tour. We got to travel a lot and no bullets flying. So grateful for that.
well, thank you for your service, Lou. I didn't get a chance to say that as well, so thank you. Appreciate it.
Speaking of that, I guess it was on Veterans Day. I'm not going to read it to you, but I put a post on LinkedIn that said, in effect, I do a lot of walking pretty much every day. There's a lot of walks in the woods around here. And inevitably, I meet somebody coming the other way. And there was a gentleman coming the other way, and he had a cap. It had the Army insignia, and then it had something about Vietnam. And so as he was approaching me, I pointed to his hat and I said, Vietnam. And he said, yeah. He said, I was there and told the years and so forth. And he looked at me and I said, thank you for your service. And he said, well, I really appreciate that. And he looked at me and he said, you? And I said, well, I was in the Army fighting the Cold War, keeping the Russians back. And he said, damn, you guys did a good job keeping the Russians back. So we had a good laugh and we shook hands and so forth. And then it was within a few days, we were driving somewhere. I don't know, we pulled off the road and I was waiting for Sharon, my wife, to get out of a store or something. And I noticed in the parking lot was a car, and the front plates on the car said U.S. Army. And so I just stood there, kind of watched that. And then I saw the guy coming over who was the driver of the car. So I braced at attention to see if he would see me. And he kind of glanced over, and then I gave a salute, and he turned around and he braced up and he saluted. And he said, I said, you were in, it said it had an airborne division. It said U.S. Army 82nd Airborne on his license plate. So I said, you were airborne? And he said, yeah. I said, well, certainly glad to have you back in one piece. And he said, I was a lieutenant colonel, so I didn't get to jump as much as everybody else did, but have a great day. And I could tell he had a smile, he had a frown on his face walking up to the car. And he had a smile on his face after we met and got in the car. So I told this story on LinkedIn, plus one more, and it was on Veterans Day. And I said, I tell you this story only so that when you see a veteran, please say to him or her, thank you for your service. It'll make his or her day, which it does.
It does.
I mean,
No doubt.
Adrian, you know that. So, I mean, I didn't know, but you said you were in the service. So, yeah, it means a lot to people who served, and particularly those who sacrificed to serve. Whether they lost a comrade or whether they got drafted out of a very sweet business they were in, or were wounded, or just being away from the family for 3 years, sometimes more, 4 or 5 years. So the least we can do is thank them.
Agreed.
Awesome.
That's a very poignant reminder. So thank you. And thanks so much.
That got over 1,000 likes, or views, I mean.
Awesome.
Well, Lou, if anybody wanted to contact you or SCORE, if they needed help with their small business, what is the website and how would they do so?
Okay, the overall website, I don't know where people are, www.score, S-C-O-R-E, just like in football, .org, O-R-G. So score.org will take you to the national website. And from there, you can request a mentor, or you can find out where the nearest SCORE chapter is, and go there, and then you can see the profiles and the photos of the mentors in that area. You get a bio on what their history has been, their education and so forth, what they're experts in. And then you can choose a mentor. You write out a very brief application. And as I say, there are no charges. And within 24 hours, you'll have a mentor. Actually, within a few hours, you'll have a mentor. And he or she will get back to you and arrange how you're going to meet and so forth. Prior to the pandemic, it was largely person-to-person, face-to-face. And that was really good to be, across the table from somebody and talking. But then with COVID, we went virtual, and all my sessions now are Zoom. Virtually all my sessions are Zoom, occasionally a phone session. The other thing you can do, you don't necessarily need a mentor. If you go to the SCORE, if someone goes to the SCORE website, score.org, there are, 100 or more articles, things you can download. Like if you're starting in a business, you're going to want to have what's called a pro forma cash flow statement to make sure your business is, as you picture it, is going to generate positive cash flow. So there's an Excel spreadsheet that you can download and work with that. There's a spreadsheet for pro forma P&L, spreadsheets for a bunch of other stuff. And then there are answers to typical questions. You know, what's the best way to find help with marketing? Or what are the different ways to market? The other thing we do is we put on webinars. I'm going to be doing, might be next week, a webinar on marketing, actually. I have a lot of experience with marketing, and I view it in a different way. A lot of people think marketing, oh yeah, that's advertising. I put a post in a newspaper or an article in a newspaper, or social media, I post on there. And my argument is that it's not a 24-hour, but I call it a virtuous circle. So marketing isn't just one thing. And I've divided it into, if you picture a clock, okay, so it goes around, 1, 2, 3, 4, and to 12. There are 12 items, 12 items that have to be done in order to be accomplished and successful with marketing. One example, all of us probably get from time to time an email from a provider. I just had one today from a hospital system, or the medical care system in this area. And it says, please fill out this form and on how we're doing. What do you like? What do you don't like? So we can maintain the good service we're providing and maybe even make it better. That's marketing, okay? Because I'm going to remember that they asked me for my opinion. I'm going to remember how I answered the questions. And I'm certainly going to go back because they took really good care of me. There's only 2 major hospital systems in this area. So that one's the leading contender right now because they asked me and a whole bunch of other people how we're doing. So Bodine, when you'll get some feedback after you do a talk, right? A presentation or whatever you do. And you'll probably, from the host, you'll probably get some feedback. You'll sense the crowd. If it's in person, well, even if it's virtual, you'll sense whether your audience is appreciative of what you're saying and how you're delivering it and so forth. But I would encourage you to a week later call the whoever was leading that for you, your client, and say, hey, you have a little time to digest what we did together, and anything you would add. How did it go? Would you do it again? I mean, not that I necessarily hire me again, but would you do that again? Am I doing it right? Is there anything I should change for the next time I do it? That makes him or her feel really good. And if they feel really good about you and somebody says, hey, I need somebody to help with DEI. Oh, I know just the right guy, Bodine Sanders. And never heard of him, but well, that's all right. You don't follow Villanova football, but there's an excuse. But that serves as marketing. Okay, checking up on how do they feel. They're going to be polite while you're there, and probably genuine. But then they're going to be talking about it, and the guy, the lady, or the man who put it on, he's going to be communicating with his group, whether it's his company or just a session that he put together. So I'm going to be giving that webinar on marketing next week, and take them around that clock. And it's called a virtuous circle. And a virtuous circle, if you look it up, means that every step you take around that clock makes you better. And if it's marketing, then your marketing is going to get better. And then you don't stop at the top. You just keep going around. And really with any process, right? You put it in a manufacturing plant, you put a process in place, you get it so it's working, and then you think, okay, how do we, keep it working so it doesn't break down and produce a quality product and so forth. But then B, how can I make it better? And so again, you go around, there's a series of things that you look at and that you try, and then you learn from that. I'm doing all the talking. Why is that?
Well, we've certainly enjoyed our time with you, Lou. We appreciate you coming on. It's been very informative, and we thank you not only for your military service, your work with the diversity, equity, inclusion. And I'm going to pass it to Bodine for the closing thoughts on Lou and your alliance.
I have one question. Excuse me, Devotine. I expected a bunch of people, more than 4, more than 3. And is this usual, or how does it go? Does it vary?
Well, we have people in the audience who are watching, and we have Sonia Tanksley. Our next guest is on tap, so we're going to bring Sonia on as soon as we wrap up this interview with you. So, we can't thank you enough.
You're welcome, and I appreciate the audience, whoever's out there. And if anybody wants to contact me for any reason, is it okay if I give my email address?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Okay. So it's Louis, Louis, score, SCORE, at score.org. No, I'm sorry, Louis.Allegra, Allegra, at score.org.
Awesome. And for those folks out there in the audience, if you have friends, family members who are thinking about starting a business or getting some help with their business, any walk of life, minority or otherwise, pass along SCORE's information so they can get the free resources they need to help them go. So we want to thank Lou. Lou, we appreciate it. We've got a lot of guests lined up. Thank you for being our first guest, and you have a good night, and we'll catch you later.
Okay, you're welcome. And thank you very much for having me, guys.
Thanks, Lou.
Awesome.
All right, great. That was a great interview. So I was chuckling. I want to give Adrian some props for the fast mute when you had some background noise.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Hey, listen. Our next guest after Sonia is Rich Pagano, and he's having some issues. So you guys go ahead and take over. I'm gonna take a step back and call him on the phone. Did you send him the link yet?
I did, and I did send it to him, and you can hold off, but
by email or phone.
I sent it to him by email, but we can send it by phone in a little bit.
Okay, I'll tell him that. Okay.
All right. So my next guest, I'm going to bring her on because I love to look at her beautiful face. So I don't want to wait another minute. Hi, Sonia.
Hi, Joanne. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm doing.
Thank you for that wonderful welcome.
I haven't even started with your welcome. What do you mean? But first of all, let me introduce you to my close friends, Adrian and Bodine. Sonia is not only one of my dearest friends, she is also very accomplished in her own right. She's an attorney. She is the founder and proprietor of the law offices of Sonia M. Tanksley and Associates, and she has over 20 years of experience practicing law. Sonia has built a firm dedicated to excellence in service. Her practice areas include real estate, criminal law, and client crisis management. It makes her sound much. She certainly has a fun and lighthearted side too, but that's the serious side of her. Sonia and her team have experience working in private practice. Sonia was the city attorney for the city of Ossining. It was a city, right? And
for Ossining, yes. Yeah. Ossining is actually a village. Deputy Corp Counsel for Ossining. Yeah.
And she's not only worked in the private sector, the government sector, and corporate departments. So I do have friends in high places. So I really appreciate you coming on,
Sonia. Well, welcome, Sonia.
And just speaking to everybody, I'm on twice because I have some audio problems. So I had to sign on with my phone and my computer. So that's why you see me twice.
Well, that's okay because Adrian has always, had some issues. So if you haven't caught any of our programs, he's the guy.
Okay.
So I'm going to throw him under the bus. But welcome, Sonia. We've heard a lot about you.
Thank you very much.
I've heard a lot about you with my conversations with my superstar Joe. She talked about you the very first time she and I met because she was one of the first people to interview me when my book debuted. So I've heard a lot about you. Welcome to the
Oh,
program.
nice. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So Sonia and I have a rich history, and she has a rich history
Rich
of
is
her
a
own.
good word. That's a good word.
So Sonia, do you want to talk about us and our relationship first
Yeah.
before, and then we're going to honor your parents, of course. I want to do that as well,
Okay.
because both of them, of course, you
Oh,
were
yeah.
first in my
That's
heart.
how I got here.
You were number one in my heart in regard to as far as Kingsley women are concerned. But then I met your mother.
Oh, yeah.
Bodine,
And then,
hold on a minute. Let me mute Bodine. Chris, can we mute
Bodine forgot to
Bodine?
mute himself.
Let me mute him. All right, I muted
There
him.
he is. Okay, there you go.
So I think that our history is very important in regards to Black history, and I wish Bodine was on here to listen to this part of
Yeah.
it. Well, you know what? I am going to wait because it is important. Let's talk about your father first. I mean, I think that your
Okay.
father had a very, unfortunately, Sonia's father just recently passed away, but he was certainly an impressive man in his own right, and I'm going to let you speak to his history.
Sure.
You wrote, okay. Tell us a little bit about your father, and I'll
So my
interject
father, unfortunately, just passed away last month. But when I say his funeral services were a celebration of life, they really, really were. We're born and raised in Albany, New York. I live down a little further south now, right outside of New York City. But in Albany, back in 1969, he was the first African American. Back then, they called them aldermen in Albany, New York. Now they're called Common Council members. And he was the first African American Common Council member in Albany, and he served for 15 years. So I grew up at a very, very young age, and for most of my childhood, with my father as a politician in downtown Albany. And it was really what kind of experience? It was, you got a bird's eye view from my dad being a politician and being an African American politician and the first Black on the Common Council. So his experience as a whole, I think he really, really liked it, appreciated it, valued it. But it was hard. It was hard, really hard being the first. I have three brothers and my mom, and we all knew the night when it was Common Council meeting, because he came in a combination of happy with the service that he did, but sometimes very frustrated with the process, frustrated with sometimes fighting for position and fighting to be heard. But then the work that he did day to day, he really appreciated. Anything from everything that you do back in those days anyway as a Common Council member, encouraging people to vote. I remember him going out, like knocking door to door, telling people that they should go vote, helping people get jobs. Particularly, I feel like every kid in downtown Albany rang our doorbell for a summer job, because remember, as teenagers, summer job is a big deal. And it was either the teenager or the parent, or the teenager and the parent, because you could tell their mother was like, ring the bell, get a job, right? And, so that was just part of this whole experience. And then him coming in, talking about his relationship with the mayor, his relationship with the other Common Council members. It was really, I took it for granted back then. And then later on, when you grow up and you're watching just stories, news stories, or reading the paper about the political process, I was like, oh, I actually know what that means. I actually, remember my father talking about the meetings and the voting and what was going on in our little city, Albany. So it landed on us, and it impacted my mom and my brothers and me in a whole myriad of ways. But I think as a whole, it was it was more of a benefit than anything else to us.
I think the history of Albany, and of course we know the history of Albany, New York, but it was a
Mhm.
democratic machine, and it was really run by
yes,
by white Irish Catholics. I mean, at the time.
yes,
So for Dan
exactly.
O'Connell to recognize and elevate your father to that position was pretty remarkable. And after your father's death, the Times Union, our local paper published an article about that. And really,
Mhm.
they said how the notice was released on a Friday night for publication. I believe they said on Saturday morning, because obviously it would fall under the auspices and be perhaps lost in the shuffle. But
Mhm.
they said, and I want to read a quote, and it said it was a remarkable sign of progress, especially when you consider that Tanksley had been born into a Jim Crow South where serving in
Right.
government would have been all but impossible. His appointment was a validation of his decision to leave behind the worlds he had known for a city more than 900 miles away. Because your father had, he left the South and came north.
Exactly.
And,
Right.
and
He was part of the whole migration north that a lot of African Americans did, and landed in places like New York or Chicago or Philadelphia, or all the parts of the northern states. And so, right, he was born on a farm. His parents were sharecroppers. They were very poor, and he always knew he wanted to go north to make something of himself. I'm sure, I am absolutely positive he never envisioned moving to this city called Albany, New York, and becoming a common council member. But it really was like like not the complete end point of his life, but like one of the pinnacle parts of his life. And that was the whole point of leaving Jim Crow South. But who knew, right? Who knew?
But in addition to that, he started a family business too in Albany.
Yes, he did.
And that was remarkable as well. A Black business owner at that time. Yeah. So, I mean, so he was accomplished.
Yeah, he started
in so many ways.
He had a couple of businesses. He had a trucking business and a liquor store. So he had a lot going on. And that was part of his, I don't know that those things were specifically intentional in that I'm going to be a council member. I know that wasn't intentional, or I'm going to have a trucking business or a liquor store. But his intention was to really just make something of himself. And then when he got married and had 4 children, he knew that, education was important. His faith was important to him. So all of those things that he was taught as a young Black boy growing up in Jim Crow South, that he knew intrinsically were important, but he would not have had the opportunity to have those things, or likely not be able to give us those things if we had all stayed in the South or been born in the South. We were actually all born North, but it was his choice to really just go searching for a better life.
So I found it, and I love that part of your story, but I found it, when I was doing my research, and I know that you wrote your father's obituary, which was fabulous testament to that. But, between your parents, I think oftentimes the women get lost in the shuffle. I went back to find your mother's obituary because I wanted to read a little bit about her. And I know you weren't in charge of writing that one, because your father must have written that one, which was really pretty nominal at best. But your mother was a phenomenal person. I adored your mother. She was, and it must have been very difficult in the respect that she was the first Black alderman's wife. And she probably got lost in the shuffle during that time. So we would be remiss not to talk about how remarkable your mother was, and you're certainly your mother.
To have that role, and to have and to have no role model for, neither one of them had a role model of what they were supposed to do, when challenges arose, how were they supposed to, sort of chart through the challenges in that political arena. Attending events, being the only Black people at the events, or just one of, just 2 of maybe 3 or 4 Black people. It was hard for them. It really was.
Yeah, definitely. And I think
But they
that
did
that
it,
is probably,
and
they did it.
he stayed in that role for 15 years. So I think that's a testament. Initially, he was appointed to fill a vacancy, but then he was elected again and again and again. So I think that's a testament to, okay, he got there and he kind of conquered the role.
Well,
All right.
I think it's, if you don't mind, I think it's kind of interesting. You mentioned the migration of your family from the south to the north. And I can
Mhm.
say
Mhm.
honestly, it's something that I didn't even recognize or realize until I was older, that
Chris,
my grandparents had done the same thing. You know, both sets of
Yeah.
grandparents, one my grandfather on my father's side from Mobile, Alabama, my grandfather on my
Mhm.
mother's side from outside of Columbia, South Carolina. And we were born in the
Yeah.
north and grew up in the north. But you know, as you grow older and you understand the experiences you have and some of the things you saw, and it was just, it was interesting to really come to that realization of where they really came from and why they came from that
Right.
place, and how they blazed their own trails when they got to the north, for the better.
Yes. And it's so interesting how, depending on where you're from in the South, that was the direction you went north. So if you're from like the Mississippi area, you kind of went towards Chicago and Detroit, whereas the folks on the Eastern Sea came straight up the
Yeah.
Eastern Seaboard to the northern states, whether it was, even going to Maryland or Philly or,
Yeah, I'm from
further
Jersey,
north
so yeah.
to New York and New Jersey.
Yeah.
I think too, Sonia. I mean, all you and your three siblings as well. I mean, your parents
Can you all
raised.
still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Can you hear us?
I don't hear you. What did
So I
I
was
do?
gonna.
Let's see.
We can. Can you hear us? We can hear you.
Okay, yes, already. I'm
Yeah,
back.
so your parents also raised four successful children. So I think that that's remarkable as well in a time when it was
Yeah, I have
difficult.
3 older brothers.
Difficult to raise children. So let's talk a little bit about us, because I think our story is
Okay, enough about
important as
them.
well.
Let's talk about us.
So Sonia and I met in high school. You might have
Ninth
to
grade.
mute. Yeah, ninth grade, and we were in the same homeroom. We went to Catholic school together, and I think back in that day, especially when you're in Catholic school, you sat in alphabetical order. Sonia's last name is Tanksley,
Yes.
mine is Tierney. So we sat either, she sat in front of me in most instances, and so we have some feedback, Sonia. You might have to mute your phone line. I don't know how we're going to do it, but but more importantly, I think that we just had similar senses of humor. We're both, so we're not going to be able to hear you now, but so we're going to, okay. So can you?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you. So we had a similar sense
I'm
of humor.
bonding with you now, Adrian, with the audio issues.
and we just found it. So as two young women, it was, even then though, I mean, there's a self-imposed, although I didn't ever think about race as a white woman, and I think that there was a self-imposed segregation. I think that most, with the exception of Sonia, I would say almost all of my friends were white, and even that, I mean, Sonia and I, we never hung around together unless we were at a party. And we never spoke about race ever. I think that when we graduated high school, we were trying to room together. Sonia and I were both accepted at Fordham University. We were going to room together. Neither of us got housing at the time, and unfortunately, Sonia did get housing. Well, not unfortunately. Sonia got housing and I didn't. So she went off to Fordham and left me behind. And I made the decision that I was not going to live in the Bronx alone at 18. So we parted ways for a while, but we always migrated back to one another. But I think in all those years, we never had a conversation about race or ethnicity or any of those types of things. And really, it was just about maybe 7 years ago. I think it was right. I don't know if I've ever spoken about this story. And I think as young women, I was preoccupied with boys. I never really thought about that. Then I wanted to get married. Then I was having children. And it really wasn't. And Sonia and I had some separation throughout the years. And it wasn't until I remember you came to my house. Well, let me tell the story. I was on vacation in Virginia, and it was probably a week after the Dylan Roof went into Charleston, South Carolina, into the church, and he shot the congregants. And I remember being in Virginia Beach. My children were young, and we were standing on the street, and a caravan of trucks came down the middle of the street, and it was people carrying or displaying the Confederate flag. And I remember being on the sidewalk with my young children, and it was clearly a sign of disdain, of hatred. And my sons were young at the time, and they said, they said, I didn't realize there was going to be a parade, or what's the parade about? And there were Black families on the street here celebrating their vacation and enjoying themselves. And, I said to my sons, this isn't a parade, but it was in a very uncomfortable moment for me. And then about a month later, or maybe 2 months later, Sonia was at my house, and I said to her, we've never had the conversation about race. And I told her about my experience. And I think that that's something that Bodine is very good at, and he is good about brokering the uncomfortable conversations, because I don't know if we didn't have it because it was uncomfortable, but even then, after knowing each other for 25 years, there was a little bit of discomfort. And I mean, that was my recollection. Do you remember that day, Sonia?
I do remember it. And I don't think I knew what to say to you, because I think often me as a Black woman, when white women or men don't understand how those incidences land on us, don't understand. You have the sense, because your general moral compass is what it is, right? But just not understanding how deeply it hurts. Like you just mentioned that you felt uncomfortable, right? And how that's what we live every single day. Whether it's a major event like that, as your children described, parade, or just the micro events and incidences that happen every single day. So I think the conversations get easier and easier to have, particularly now that there's more of a public discussion going on. But back then, I don't think the public discussion was what it is now. So it's a little bit awkward in that you almost want to say, well, what do you want me to say? That's our life. That's what we have. That's what we experience. That's the hate that's out there. But you don't want to say that. It seems very almost accusatory in some sense, and you don't want to paint any group with a broad brush, with an accusation. You don't want to. I mean, my assumption was that you wanted to understand more. You wanted to have the dialogue. But then the question is, the dialogue toward what end? The dialogue dialogue and conversation usually are an exchange of ideas, exchange of information. So then the question is, what are we exchanging? What is the information or ideas that we're going to exchange? Maybe what's the goal of this exchange? We just lost Adrian for a moment. So I do remember it being awkward because sometimes you just, and I guess sometimes the awkwardness is in how it's presented. So if it's a relaying of the event that happened, it's sort of laid out there, but you're unsure what you're looking for.
Well, I think at that time when we talked about it, and I think that in addition, I think we wanted to make a difference. And although I landed someplace else in the podcasting world, I mean, the initial thought was that you and I were going to have a podcast, and that we were going to take all of these events that came up and dissect them and talk about them and try to change the landscape and perspective and open that conversation and take some of the awkwardness and uncomfortableness away. But then life as young mothers got in our way, and we really kind of got derailed. But so I'm glad that we're sharing this moment now.
So what you're saying, Superstar, is I wasn't your first choice? Oh my goodness. You gotta be kidding me.
Well, no, yes, you are. That's why she didn't go with me, because she wanted to go with her first choice. But Joanne, let's talk a little more about our high school experience, if you're open to it. In that, one of the things we talked about was, although we were friends, we didn't socialize with each other. I socialized with the Black kids. You socialized with the white kids, and the two didn't really mix. We didn't have any racial issues at school, right? I can't remember any incidences that involved racial tensions, but it was kind of an unspoken truth that like after a basketball game or after a football game, the white kids are going to go do their thing, the Black kids were going to go do our thing.
I would say that was true primarily, but I think by the time our senior year came along, I mean, there was much more mingling. I mean, George Spriggs used to have the big parties, and I think that would have we would have some of those events, but I think that was primarily true. And I don't think, and tell me how you thought about it at the time. I didn't even give that a thought. I just thought that this is the party. Yeah, we didn't think about it. Our friends were just having a party and we just went. I don't think I think for the most part, I don't think there were, and I don't want to say none, but to my knowledge, I didn't see any racial tensions. I think we had a very, very successful athletic program. And in our senior year, we went undefeated in football, and we had some really stellar athletes. And I think that, those, and Bodine speaks about this all the time. I think the camaraderie of those teammates were seamless. I think the Black kids and the white kids, especially the athletes, got along very well. But I think it was different too. I mean, we lived in different areas of town. And I think that when we walked, I mean, we weren't driving. Nobody was driving at the time. And so I think location played into that. We had to rely on our parents, unless we were, the athletes might have been walking around town, but, I was lazy at that time. I didn't do a lot of walking downtown. But I do think it was unspoken, but I don't think it was thought of either. At least from the white perspective. I don't think I gave that. I know I didn't give it any thought. What are Sonia and her friends doing tonight? And it wasn't even
to that extent. No, I don't. I think to the extent I can speak for the group of Black kids, we weren't wondering what Joanne and other folks. I don't want to mention people's names because they may not want their names mentioned, but I don't think we were contemplating what Joanne and everybody else was doing. We just went and did our thing. But it was interesting because, I was a cheerleader, I ran track, all those things were, were integrated, so to speak, but there was never the thought that after a game, I would go hang out with the other cheerleaders. There was never a thought that after a track meet, we would all go and get something to eat together. That we separated.
I'll say this, that's interesting to me. And I'm gonna say that because it sounds like you two come from the same type of town that I came from. And it's predominantly white town. Yes, in a lot of cases, there was separation in the town as to where the whites lived and where the blacks lived in a lot of cases, not all cases, but a lot of them. But in the same breath, we all, if it was a party, we partied together. If there was a football game, it wasn't separated in the manner where the whites were at one party and the blacks were at another party, or they weren't thinking about it. We all pretty much came together. So it's an interesting dynamic to me, listening to you guys.
And my story. Go ahead, Sonia.
No, it's interesting that, and we all, I feel like classroom, in the class and in the hallways, we laughed and we joked. But when it came to socializing outside of school, for the most part, it was separate.
Agreed. And our town wasn't small. I mean, we actually came from a fairly big city, and I don't think it was predominantly white. I think it was probably, but we were in a very small school. I think that's the difference. I mean, Albany isn't predominantly white, Sonia, would you say? I think it's probably pretty different.
Did you say you went to Catholic school?
We did. So our school was very small.
Okay. So then that all right. Then that may make a little sense to me then.
Yeah.
And so if you don't mind, let me chime in just a little bit here. The three of your experiences, based on what I heard, it's definitely different than my high school experience, right? So my high school and my neighborhood was, again, 99.5% black. My high school was 99.9% black. Although we had some white teachers and black teachers, but in terms of the student body, all of my teammates in high school were black. All of my coaches in high school were black, right? And then when you compare Jacksonville, Florida, to what city are we talking about in New York? Albany?
Albany, the capital.
The capital. So in Jacksonville is back in the 80s when I was in high school, was the largest city in the United States land-wise, which meant we have a lot of folks in the city limits, right, of Jacksonville. So you're talking a big town with a lot of different segments in terms of high schools, junior high schools, and so forth. So my experience, although Adrian and I and Sonia are black, we have 2, maybe 3 different experiences. So in other words,
yes,
everybody's experience is different.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it is. And I think
that you can't, don't presume anything about all black people, all white people, all any, ethnicity, race. There's,
And that's really where some conversations become harder. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sonia.
Well, no. Go ahead. We're just only going to say we're just people living our lives, having the experiences that we're having in our little corner of the world. So I just like to, when people say things like that, I extrapolate it out and say, see, we are really just all people living our little lives here. Don't presume anything, really.
So, Adrian,
and that's why certain conversations are harder for some and easier for others.
So
and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if that conversation is between a person of color or a person that's not of color, because again, I write about my teammates, right, who we just interviewed last week for the Super Bowl show, Big Country and Perry Hodge. They had more diversity growing up than I did, right? They had it. So when I became their roommate, I learned that they understood and knew how to have the race conversation more so than I did, because they had more experience, right? And they were white, right? My white teammates and / roommates had more diversity because their parents positioned them and put them in a position to start learning at an early age regarding how to get along with everybody. So their parents focused on not putting them on a Pop Warner football team that was all white. No, they went out of their way to involve them in sports where it was diversity, right? So I didn't have that. They had it. So I was behind the 8 ball having these conversations. And when I began having these conversations with Rich, Big Country, and Perry, I was learning. And then I said, okay, I can have deeper conversations because they were prepared. They had more experience. So we were all on the same level playing field regarding having the conversations. If anything, I was behind the 8 ball, but I learned. And then I said, okay, I can take the next question to another level and not necessarily be concerned about someone being uncomfortable or feeling awkward. First of all, we're football players, right? We're aggressive by nature, right? So we were able to have that conversation. So, everybody can have different experiences when they're having those conversations.
So I want to, before we go anywhere, hold on, Tanya. I want to bring up an important point that Lori has said in the comments, and I think that Adrian, you'll find this very interesting. So Lori is saying that she remembers, I don't want to pronounce the name of the town wrong, Metuchen, the way Sonia remembered her experience. Adrian may have a different experience because he was a super athlete. So I assume Lori is from your hometown, and she has an entirely different perspective than you do, which I find to be very interesting.
And I'm not surprised at that, because I think there are, I think there's a mix. I think there are some that did interact with everybody, and there were some that did not, that really kind of stayed more with their own. I'm not surprised that she would have that view of it at all.
Yeah, and then we have Coach Andy's here. He said, I agree, Coach A. I'm a lot younger and never lived those situations, but very locked in and listening to the conversation. I actually love to have the conversations that y'all are speaking of. I was raised to respect everyone, never knew different besides what we learned about in school or in conversations with friends. So, and I will say, just from a different perspective, I mean, from diversity enriches our lives. I mean, the relationships that we have, if you limit yourself, and there's a different type of segregation in America today that, many people live in, and I'm an example of that. There's very little diversity in the town that I live in now, is that we flock and we spend time with people who look like us. And I think that that's a very commonplace in America. And I think that there's something to be said to embrace different people across all different types across all different areas of your life, whether it's professional, personal, your children. You got to broaden your perspectives, and I think that this program is a great tool and avenue for that. So Sonia, we may have to revisit our podcast, because now I'm a seasoned pro.
I'd be happy to.
All right.
I want to be your first guest.
Okay. Well, I was going to comment on with what you said, Bodine. Even though we had diversity in our school, and I had my friend Joanne and a couple of other people I was friends with, but maybe not as close as I was to Joanne. But even though we had the diversity, we still didn't talk about it. So I feel like later on, for example, when I went to college and had a roommate, I still wasn't prepared for the conversation.
Right. And that's again the example, and I write about it in my book. And I'm not just saying sports. Obviously, the military is the best example, right? But I wrote about my experience. This could happen in the band. This can happen in any group activity. But I specifically focus on football. In terms of football or sports, when you're together so much, right? You're together with your teammates all the time, especially in season. Mother Nature makes it where you're going to have these conversations. The question is, are you going to pursue it and continue the conversation, or are you going to avoid it? So I'm not saying all my teammates who were white were, having this conversation, but there were enough that was in my inner circle, right, who were able to have these conversations, and we were better off for it because we were able to learn more about each other while we were traveling on the road, be it at a hotel or on the bus, whether we were living in the dorm or hanging out, at a restaurant, right? So you have the opportunity. It's up to the person or persons to pursue the conversation and pursue the opportunity when the conversations happen. You guys talked about the two of you not pursuing it, right? You didn't bury it. You just kind of avoided it, right? And again, we were all young, right? So, but some folks like to approach the topic. I mean, I talk about my good friend Toonie Corey, who was a pistol. She was all of 5'2", not even 100 pounds. And man, she would tell you any and everything on her mind. So everybody's personality is different. So I'm one of those people that, again, Joe said, I know how to navigate the conversation on race. That's because I've been thinking and living in this space since 1984, right? Not everybody does. But some people can approach it in their own way. And again, I'm about the low-hanging fruit, right? Introduce yourself, find common ground, and then build a relationship from there. Sure, some people can handle meeting someone for the first time and having an uncomfortable conversation. But we all know the percentage, the numbers, they're not going to end up on the same page having something common because they're going to end up disagreeing, walking away, and then they miss the opportunity. But if you approach it from introduction, finding common ground, building the relationship, when the uncomfortable conversation happens, you've created and built a friendship where it can withstand two people having different opinions and continuing the relationship. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think sometimes too, the uncomfortable conversation doesn't mean that you have two different perspectives. And not that I can empathize with anybody's perspective here on the panel, but I certainly agree with your perspective. I don't think that there's anything that I would disagree with in any of the conversations that any of us have had. I can't empathize. I cannot put myself in those positions, but I certainly agree with everything that you say, and that's not true of everyone, of course, but it's certainly true of me. I mean, I may not always agree with Sonia's fashion sense, but I agree with everything she says about race.
But Joe, don't you think had you had another classmate, another peer who looked like you, help you navigate that conversation and that process, it would have allowed you to get a little bit more comfortable. So when you did have the opportunity to have that conversation with Sonia, maybe it would have happened. Could you see that?
Perhaps, but it does. But I don't. There was no one at that time to have that conversation, And I think too, as young women, in all honesty, I wasn't avoiding the conversation. I was just too busy chasing boys. it didn't even occur to me, right? I mean, I was concerned with happy hour, and it never, whereas there's a heightened awareness, I believe, because like Sonia said, that's your day to day. You're living it when you're a Black individual. You're living in that environment. When, in all honesty, and I hate to say this now, but it wasn't even a thought for me. I never thought about, Sonia being mistreated or denigrated because of her race, because I adored her, and that wasn't my parents. I've never heard my parents say anything contrary or derogatory or racist. So it wasn't even in my thoughts. I wasn't even thinking it. I was just a young girl worrying about, remember Sonia back in high school, worrying about not doing anything that would go on my permanent record,
Yes.
your permanent transcripts. I mean, and there was a lot of pressure just being Catholic, so I was just trying to survive. I was trying to survive the nuns. I wasn't thinking about race at all. And I think it really wasn't until I was an adult and probably in my early 30s when it became a component of my fabric. And when you're watching the news and when you're really starting to live to see the disparities in treatment and inequality and equity, and that's really when I started thinking about, Sonia and I have never spoken about this, and maybe it's time that we do. So I think that it wasn't avoidance; it just was ignorance, really.
Well, I think we're all products of our environments too. So when I say that there are multiple environments that you can be a product of, you're a product of your upbringing by your parents and your family, what you may or may not hear within the home, what may or may not be discussed as it relates to race. And then you're a product of your environment of where you grow up. And I think when we're younger, depending on the person, obviously, I don't think it's really something that you have a conversation with unless for some reason it's thrown in your face. Everybody when they're younger, in most cases, they're living their lives, they're trying to fit in, they're trying to live up to expectations. There are all these things that they're doing. But, really, unless you're confronted with it, I just don't think it's a normal conversation that you're going to have at that age anyway.
I agree.
It's probably, and you know what? See, I don't know if you all have children, but I have a 16-year-old, and they have those conversations now. Whereas, I mean, you and we were going to be roommates. We were, potentially looking for an off-campus apartment, et cetera, and never talked about race, ethnicity. But now, thanks to the current landscape of where we are and how we've evolved, my 16-year-old has those conversations. And those conversations are actually facilitated in school. So that helps, right? Those conversations were never facilitated in our little Catholic high school.
No,
No,
definitely not. And my sons have the conversation too. So, I say they have the conversations. They do have conversations about race. They're very, they're very aware. And I think that, they're very in tune, and they don't agree with they're always speaking out about inequity, but of course our town isn't very diverse. So, they speak about it, but they don't have a way to act on it. And I think so I'm trying to enlighten them in many different ways. And I hope that those conversations in particular, and it's not just about race. I mean, it's about LGBTQ and all of those things. I think those conversations happen when we would have never spoken about those types of things. And and in high school. I mean, I don't. Nobody was gay to my. I'm sure people were gay, but they weren't coming out or talking about it, and especially at a Catholic school. I mean, nobody was coming out and celebrating their sexuality. We didn't, even if you were heterosexual, we didn't talk about anything to do about that. You know, it certainly was condoned. There was no sex ed, of course, at a Catholic school because abstinence was the rule. So there was nothing to talk about in regard to that.
Yep,
I mean,
life is different, and we're roughly, the four of us are basically in the same age group, right?
Right.
So it's just amazing how
55 over here.
Yep, that's the age group.
that's
Right on the
age
button.
group. That's the age group. That makes me older by 1 year. So, but yeah, I mean, every 10, 15, 20 years, culture changes, right? So we've talked about, people repeat this cliche, our goal is for the next generation to be better than us. Where they are, they're having these conversations, right?
I think they are. Yeah.
Yep. So they're having these conversations, which we didn't have based on our different experiences, right? But to piggyback off of the LGBTQ, you know, I wrote about it in my book, how there was someone who was a teacher, lived in my neighborhood. My sister knows exactly who I'm talking about. And he was gay, but he had a wife. And as a young kid, had no idea what that meant. But one day, again, this is in my book, this person, teacher, got picked up by his boyfriend, and they were traveling in their car, and it was a convertible. And it was an early Saturday morning. So maybe he thought nobody would be up to see it. And I was up cutting the grass. My mom came home from working overnight, and I saw it. She saw it. I looked at my mom, and she said, "Keep your mouth shut." So that was how we handled it in our neighborhood. My mom said, "Mind your business," right? So that meant it's none of your business. Keep your mouth shut. Don't go around spreading rumors. It's got nothing to do with you. Continue cutting that grass. So that's some communities, right? We were taught, keep your mouth shut, mind your bees, right? Yep, that's Sand. She's right. And so every culture is different, right? So that's kind of how we learn at an early age. Like Ferris says, sometimes you learn from your home, right? But I grew up going to Sunday school in a Baptist church. So I went to Sunday school and church, right? So some people have that spiritual foundation. Some have the, as I call it, the sports foundation, and everybody's experience is different.
So we could, Sonia and I can talk all night, Bodine and I can talk all night, but we do, and Sonia, you're welcome to stay on and continue with the conversation, but we have two guests waiting in the wings. We have Rich Pagano and Stan Green. So so you want to stay on, Sonia, and we'll bring Rich on?
I'll check in with you good people another day.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're going to take off?
I said I'll check in with you.
All right. I know it's past your bedtime. So Sonia, it's been, I can't say enough about you. I love you. I adore you. And I hate
love you more.
So we'll talk. And this won't be our last conversation. We'll certainly
absolutely not.
We'll have you on as a guest in the near future. And
oh, absolutely.
Okay.
You got to come back. Sonia, you got to come back, because last week Joe found out some dirt on me from my teammates, so I got to start digging.
Oh, I got some of those.
I got to start digging with you. So, hey, you are more than welcome to come back.
Absolutely. Yes.
Oh, all right. So, Sonia, you will not be back. Because my dirt can get ugly.
Yes.
See what happens, Joe. You opened a can of worms last week,
Yeah, true, true.
and I knew this was coming, so I didn't say anything. I was like, I'm gonna be patient. Mhm.
Oh, look
There
at
you
the time.
The nuns would be very disappointed in my dirt. I will say that.
Yes.
All right, so I'll talk to you soon. Love you.
Thanks,
All
Sonia.
right, bye.
Thanks,
Thanks for
Sonia.
having me, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Take care. See what happens.
I see. I won't make that mistake again. So
Mhm.
so let's bring Rich on. I want to apologize. We went a little long. We kind of went off track, but I thought that was a great conversation and important
Absolutely.
to have. So yes,
Absolutely wonderful. Yep.
So let's bring Rich in. Rich is and Stan. We're not forgetting about you. We see you in the wings, and we're going to be bringing you on shortly. But hi, Rich. How are you? Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for having me.
Rich, look at it, Mr. Handsome.
I think I know that guy, Bodine. Yeah.
So let me introduce Rich. Rich is a sports historian who specializes in Delaware County, Philadelphia sports history. He writes a sports history column for the Spirit newspaper and has authored 2 books, Delaware County Sports Legends, and I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, The Baron of Leaperville, The Life and Times of James F. Doherty, which I've actually looked that book up today because, I'm of Irish heritage and I'm very interested in that book, and I'm certainly going to pick it up. Since 1987, he has written over 1,700 columns on past sports personalities of Delaware County. He's also on the board of directors of the Pennsylvania Sports Hall of Fame in the Delaware County chapter, the Philadelphia Sports Writers Association, and the Sports Legends of Delaware County Museum. So thanks so much for joining us. We've been looking forward to your appearance all day. So welcome, and I'm going to hand it over to Bodine. I did enough talking in the last segment.
Well, I wanted to mention you did pronounce Leaperville properly. Very good.
All right, great.
Well, he's a former educator too, so he's got that teacher. That's that teacher in him. Well, Rich, thanks for being our guest. I appreciate it. For those who saw me jump on and off, I wanted to make sure Rich got on. When regarding the technology, I wanted to make sure everything worked out because we really do have a special guest who's written more articles and has forgotten. He knows more about sports than, people that you hear on TV who think they're, the best at knowing about sports. And he's written a number of articles and books. He introduced me to, because he might even talk about it tonight, about the Emlyn Tunnel, a gentleman who I didn't even know about. Rich introduced me to Emlyn Tunnel, who grew up right down the street from Villanova. I didn't even know it, right? So he's forgotten more sports history than I know, right? So he's the guy to have on the program tonight. He also mentored me and helped me when I started writing my book. He was referred to me by someone else in the media industry. Again, I come from the media world. I used to work for Comcast. I used to work for Montgomery News. And so I was referred to him, and he gave me a lot of insight, a lot of help to get me started. So welcome to the program, Rich.
Well, thanks, Bo. You mentioned Emlyn Tunnel, one of my favorite subjects, and you pronounced it right too. People will say tunnel instead of tunnel, but it still amazes me how many people, including NFL football players, who have no idea who he is. And he's the first black player to be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1967. And that doesn't help. They still have no idea. So we decided he was from our county, and Delaware County is southwest of the city of Philadelphia, where Villanova is, Bo's alma mater. And what we decided to do, he's from a section called Garrett Hill in Radnor Township, which is where Villanova is. We decided to raise money to do a statue, an 8-foot bronze statue of Emlyn Tunnell, which stands now at the municipal building there, Radnor Township. And it was kind of tough because Emlyn Tunnell died very young. He was only 50 years old. Back in 1975, he passed away. So a lot of people had forgotten about him. And even though just recently, when they come up with the 100th anniversary of pro football, 1920 to 2020, he was picked as the #1 punt returner in those 100 years. Well, that's Billy Johnson. I'm getting the two because we have two Delaware County football players that are on that 100th anniversary team. Billy White Shoes Johnson is the punt returner, and Emlyn Tunnell was picked as the #1 safety defensive back in pro football history. So we raised the money, and Bo was part of the unveiling of the statue, which happened back in June of 2018. And it was a great day. Bo could tell you that too. We had a luncheon and plenty of people. In fact, Billy White Shoes Johnson was there, and some other pro football players. And that statue is right there in Radnor Township, right at the municipal building. But when I think of Emlyn Tunnell, just an amazing guy. Was an all-state football player, basketball player at Radnor High School, went away to Toledo University. And what happened was, well, he actually broke his neck playing football. And there was a priest there that gave him his last rites in the hospital. They didn't think he was going to make it. He did. But he did end up going home. He did play basketball at Toledo, played in the NIT at Madison Square Garden. He was an outstanding basketball player too. But when he went back to school, and I don't want to leave out his service, he couldn't get into the Army or the Navy because of the neck. But the Coast Guard took him. So he was on a Coast Guard cutter during the war. What a hero he was. He saved two men. One when a torpedo hit the boat and the man fell overboard, and Emlyn jumped in the water to save him. He didn't even know how to swim. Another time they were hit, and one of the players, one of the shipmates was caught on fire, and Emlyn grabbed him and embraced him and put the fire out, and even got some burns himself. So he was this great athlete plus a World War II hero. And then when he went back to the University of Iowa, and he was an outstanding player, of course, playing big time football. And he left before his senior year. He wanted to play pro football. So he came home to Radnor Township, and he hitchhiked up to New York City to visit and see the owner of the New York Giants, Tim Mara. But all I'm thinking about is 1948. Here's a black man hitchhiking from Radnor Township up to New York City. I can't imagine what that was like. Who was picking him up? Well, he got picked up by a fellow that had a truck full of bananas, and picked him up and took him almost the whole way. So he just knocked on the door, went in and talked to Tim Mara, who was, I think they had some idea who he was, had heard about him, but he didn't get drafted. And he said, I want to play for the New York Giants. And they gave him a contract. And in 1948, he became the first black player for the New York Giants. And for the next 14 years, he just was one of the best defensive backs to play in the game. Played 12 years for the Giants, was all pro, won a an NFL championship in '56, and then when Vince Lombardi, who was one of the assistant coaches for the Giants, got the job at Green Bay, he took Emlen Tunnell with him. Not just because he was a good player, but as Emlen, I'm trying to remember his quote. When he got to Green Bay, he said, I think it was me and two other blacks who were the only people in that only African Americans in that entire town. But Vince Lombardi was drafting and recruiting and trading for a lot of different black players. And he thought Emlen would be a big help for these players to assimilate into the team and into the league. Because at that particular time, there were very few blacks in the NFL. So after playing for Green Bay, and he what was interesting, they played the Philadelphia Eagles at Franklin Field in the 1960 championship game. And of course they lost, the Eagles won. But Emlen Tunnell was playing for Green Bay, and for the Eagles was Ted Dean, and he was also a Radnor graduate. So you had two Radnor high school players playing against each other, which was really interesting. So he retired after the 61 season, and he became a scout for the Giants, the first African-American scout in the NFL. He became an assistant coach, the first black assistant coach in the NFL. And so he was doing that up until 75. Actually, he passed away of a heart attack at their camp up in Connecticut, the Giants camp. And but before that, he got married and, of course, got inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He's just an amazing guy. And see, football wasn't as popular as baseball back during those times. Everybody knows Jackie Robinson's name. You ask anyone, they're going to know something about Jackie Robinson. You ask them about Emlen Tunnell, they'll say, who? And I'm talking about people that play football, too, don't know who he is. And we all felt as though they should know, not just because he's from our area, Delaware County, but because of what he accomplished in race relations, in playing football, in being a World War II hero. I mean, he's someone to really look up to. And so anyway, we have that statue here in Delaware County. And what's interesting, we have another statue we just finished, and we just got a location for it, Fredia Gibbs. And I don't know if you can see, this is our, during Black History Month, we have a lot of the great black athletes from our county. We have these posters made up. And Fredia Gibbs, a female, a black woman who has just accomplished so much. She was an All-American track athlete in high school, went to Chester High School, which is in Delaware County. And she went to Cabrini, where she became an All-American basketball player. But then later, and there's so much I could tell you about her, but later she got into boxing and kickboxing. And she became the first African-American world champion kickboxer. And I wrote about her quite a few times. She's out in Los Angeles right now. But the statue, we raised money for a statue for her, and Cabrini College wants the statue on their campus. She's in their Sports Hall of Fame. Cabrini is right there in Radnor Township, not far from Villanova, not far from our sports museum we have there. So that's the second statue that was done by Jennifer Fredakis, who's been she's just a great sculptor, and she teaches a sculpture course there in Radnor. And so we decided, let's do a third statue of a Delaware County athlete. And it's another African-American, Billy White Shoes Johnson, who you should remember, or maybe some of you do. Play for the Houston Oilers, and of course started doing his funky chicken dance when he would score a touchdown in the end zone. In fact, I say White Shoes. He started doing that when he was in high school. He went to Chichester High School, which is in Delaware County. He painted his shoes white, and he remembers the first time his coach saw it and kind of looked. But Billy, do what you have to do, because he was so valuable to the team. But back then, nobody, maybe Joe Namath had white shoes when he played for the Jets, but that was kind of, what are you doing with white shoes?
Yeah,
we're all supposed to look the same. You know what I mean, Bo?
well, the spikes, the spike shoes or the football shoes were black.
Right.
So yeah, so that's why it's relevant to the conversation. Go ahead.
I keep going on here, but just anytime you want to say something, because I'm trying to fit in as much as I can here.
No.
That's all great information. Keep going.
You're doing great. And listen, Ferris, Billy White Shoes lives in Atlanta, by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes,
So,
because he played for the Atlanta Falcons too, besides the Houston Oilers. And then he had a job. I forget in what capacity. He's retired now. But yeah, he still lives in Atlanta, and he did work for the Falcons after he was done playing with them. So we have our sculptor working on his statue. They do a little maquette first, about 14 inches in clay. And then it's a long process, this putting a statue together. But it's going to, we're hoping, we just went, he grew up in a town called Marcus Hook, and we have the location for the statue. It's going to go right in their town. So this fall, either in September or October, we're going to have the unveiling. We're not sure about Friedia's unveiling yet, whatever Cabrini wants to do that. But Billy Johnson's unveiling will be in the fall, and it's going to be great. We have gotten raising money for Billy was so much easier than Emlyn, in the fact that a lot of the people he played for are still living. And just the other day, we got a check for $1,000 from Earl Campbell.
Nice.
The great running back who played with Billy.
Yeah, his
the
teammates.
Houston Oilers. Dick Vermeil just gave us a check the other day. Bill Manlove, who coached Billy at Widener University. So the money's been pouring in from all these different groups and different people. It's really been outstanding. They just they all love Billy Johnson, and if you remember his coach with the Houston Oilers, there's a great clip of him.
Bum Phillips, right?
Bum Phillips.
Yep. Running back, one of those. He had some of the best punt returns I've ever seen. I don't even know if he knew what he was doing, but Bum Phillips, there's a great clip that NFL Films have where he's yelling and running down the sidelines, "Go Billy, go Billy," on one of his outstanding punt returns. And in fact, in punt returning, he broke a lot of, or some of Emlyn Tunnell, because Emlyn Tunnell used to run back kickoffs, punts. He did a little bit of everything. But so, yeah, we've been in touch with Billy. What a great guy he is. He was there for our Bo, I'm sure, saw him and you got a picture with him too, didn't you, Bo? He came up for our unveiling of the Emlyn Tunnell statue back in 2018. So we're looking forward to that. But those three athletes, 2 males, 1 female, all 3 African-American, are going to have statues in our county. It's outstanding. I mean, it's going to be great. I don't know. There's 67 counties in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure. I don't think there's any. We did some research. I don't think there's any statues of any female athletes in the entire state. Now, there may be some male athletes, but I just think it's quite an accomplishment, which is really started by we have a Sports Legends of Delaware County Museum, and it's right in Radnor Township. And we have a lot of memorabilia in there and artifacts from all these great athletes from our county. But yeah, I think next year when we have, when Black History Month comes around again, we're going to have 3 statues of 3 great Black athletes in our county. It's something worth talking about, something worth bragging about.
Well, listen, that's all great stuff. That's exactly why I wanted to have you on the program. Before you go, Rich, talk about any of the books that you have that you want folks to know about, that they want to pick up your books on Amazon or what, on your website?
Yeah. The first book I did, Delaware County Sports Legends, it is sold out, and I'm working on doing a second printing. But the second book I did, The Baron of Leaperville, The Life and Times of James F. Doherty, you can purchase it on Amazon, and it's about what a character, a fellow from our county who had a boxing establishment at the turn of the century. And what was interesting about this James F. Doherty, he had quite a few black fighters, and one especially, George Godfrey, who was a heavyweight, who was ranked second in the world, but never got a shot at the title. Jack Dempsey was the champion, world champion at that time, and he drew what they call the color line. He fought black fighters on his way up, but once he became champion, he would not fight a black fighter. And he took a little bit of heat from it. Some of the promoters didn't want to promote it either. But this George Godfrey, who was managed and trained by James F. Doherty, right about a mile from where I live here, was a great fighter and could have definitely been a world champion. And that he's just one example. It happened a lot in boxing, and where the color line was drawn, and they never got a chance. But it's a great book, The Baron of Leaperville, that can be purchased on Amazon. They're the two books that Bo's talking about. So I didn't know if you had another question. I didn't know how much time you had. I know you ran over, and I really appreciate you having me on,
No, we appreciate it. We do have a next guest. Any questions, any comments, Joe or Ferris, before we let my main man, Rich Pagano, go?
I don't have any questions, but that was a nice history lesson for me because I definitely did not know about Tanel. And
Oh, yeah.
I'm a sports guy and I love sports and claim to know some things, but that was a great lesson for me. I enjoyed hearing those.
See, at that time, baseball was the national game. I don't feel as though it's the national game anymore. I think football has overtaken it. But back then, probably college football was bigger than pro football.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Ferris would understand that, Rich, because Ferris played baseball at Villanova. We were freshmen together at Villanova. So he played baseball. So he's a baseball guy. So you guys could have some extended conversations. Not tonight. We'll get you back.
Yes.
But we'll make that happen.
He played for George Bennett.
Yes.
George Bennett was the baseball coach then, wasn't he? Or
wasn't he?
I played. Bennett came. My freshman year was when Bennett came on staff, and he took over the following year.
Okay.
So who was the head coach? Shane? Larry
Shane?
Yeah,
Larry Shane. He recruited.
Coach Shane was Coach Shane, because Brian Shane, his son, and I were roommates. See, we never even had this conversation. And see what happens when you extend the conversation, you find out more. Awesome. Well, listen, thanks for coming. I'll tell you what, folks just learned that there were two guys who were examples of Deion Sanders before he became Deion Sanders. Emlen Tunnell had more interceptions, more kick returns, and interception returns for TDs, right? And then you got Billy White-Hughes Johnson. So those guys were the standard. Unfortunately, they appeared at a time where football wasn't in its glory. So Deion, even though I love Deion, right? I've got my Deion stuffed animal, right? But as a defensive back, I appreciate hearing those stories about Emlen Tunnell when you invited me to that event, because I absolutely did not know about him. And I was able to meet a lot more people at that event that I would have never had an opportunity. At least I think I would not have had an opportunity to meet. So thanks for the invite, Rich. We appreciate you coming on, and we will connect again real soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Rich.
All right.
Bye, Rich. Thank you.
Sure.
So before I introduce him, I'm going to bring Stan on. I appreciate his patience. He's been waiting in the wings for quite some time.
Oh, he's got a great story to tell. He's got a lot of great stories. Stan is Stan, go ahead.
Let's bring him in. Hi, Stan. Thanks so much for hanging on and waiting in the wings. And we've had some amazing guests, but I'll throw this cliche out there: we're saving the best for last. So
the pressure's on.
You're certainly worth the wait. I want to read a little bit about your bio. It's certainly a pleasure to meet you. And Stan is a seasoned professional with over 25 years of experience in helping individuals, large corporations, small businesses, and government entities reach their full potential through financial management, positive engagement, and empowerment. Stan is currently president of Power Thinking Corp, a global human development firm which helps people and organizations thrive. He has conducted successful resilience and power thinking workshops for Comcast, Merck, and Aflac, as well as with the partners in Beijing, China, and Tokyo, Japan. Stan is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, where he was co-president of his award-winning class. He was a captain of a top 20 basketball team coached by Basketball Hall of Fame coach Chuck Daly, who went on to coach the Detroit Pistons. So welcome, Stan. I'm sure I missed something because you've had a long and storied career, but thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me. Adrian and Bodine, thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It's really a pleasure to be with you. And same shame I couldn't overlap with Richard Pagano, because a lot of what I do today was inspired by my experiences in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. And he probably remembers back then we had a company called Suburban Cable. So it was really good to hear him and the guest before, on her experiences and with Joe and with race and so forth. So great program. I certainly wasn't bored, waiting in the background. I was really engaged.
Well, listen, with your resume and your profile and your experiences, however you want to, add to the conversation, feel free to do so. But as well as I do, I like to approach the conversation on DEI from a positive perspective, but also from a sports perspective, because that's what I know. And I'm sure you can share, whatever story you want in terms of what you've learned through sports and business related to DEI and, some history in there. So the floor is yours, Stan. The floor is yours.
Well, with Power Thinking, it's all about helping people with the utilization of these evidence-based skills that came out of the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center, build skills that helps them to bounce back from any adversity. And I mean any adversity. And certainly, when I think about the initial conversation about race and being conscious of those kinds of things, it's only recently, over the past year, where I really found out in my family, going back, some of the roots of the beliefs that people have today. When we talk about power thinking, we help people understand their thoughts as driven by their deep-rooted beliefs, which were formed by the time they were 8 years old. So I had the opportunity through Ancestry to go back to where a lot of the things that we're all struggling with as a society had its root. So this was really interesting. I find myself really, when I watch old programs like the Jeffersons, I see where, George Jefferson's mother was born in the late 1800s. It was the same period where my great grandmother, who I remember in Philadelphia, we used to go see her in South Philadelphia. And it's only within the past couple of years that I found out she was born in 1888. Wow. What's even more interesting, and so here's a person I knew, stayed over her house, and turns out she was just born, in the late 1800s. But what's more interesting is that her father-in-law was born in 1835. Here's a woman that I knew, and her father-in-law was born in 1835. But the most interesting thing about that was that he was the property of the then governor of Georgia, Wilson Lumpkin. Her married name was Lumpkin. And so when you do the history, she came out of Athens, Georgia, and she migrated north. Wilson Lumpkin, governor of Georgia, he and his brother have a big presence, in terms of the Lumpkin House, Lumpkin Street, on the University of Georgia campus. And his brother was the co-founder of the University of Georgia Law School. Mama, as we affectionately called her, her father-in-law was one of Wilson Lumpkin's slaves. So it's really, really interesting to see that. And then her migration to the north, leaving her husband, William Lumpkin, behind, who probably, I would suspect, thought, I'm not going anywhere. I'm a Lumpkin, I'm going to stay right here. But those beliefs that have been passed down, not too many generations, hasn't been that long ago, we still struggle with today and kind of wonder why we have the challenges that we have. And folks really don't understand how recent all of this was. So I just thought I'd throw that out, given the initial conversation that was had, and really proud that I'm kind of in the business of helping people to challenge those deep-rooted beliefs, and to, not just because we believe them, just doesn't make everything that we believe accurate and correct or right. So that's kind of what we do. And it all started, actually, the impetus for that was in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, when in 1990, I took over a struggling cable TV system. And where I was told when I go into that cable system as the general manager, that I should fire certain people because they were so negative, the things that they believed in and how they responded to adversity. And when I evaluated some of these folks, I found that, people were passionate and they were smart. And if we can change certain things about how they believe they would respond to adversity, we would have just a juggernaut. And that's what happened. Jerry Lenfest, who was the owner of a number of cable systems outside of Philadelphia, who brought me on board, had a ranking of cable systems based on their profitability, customer service, and so forth. The cable system I took over in Wallingford, PA, in Delaware County was ranked 11 out of 13, almost dead last. We didn't fire anybody. We went in and focused on their mindset and on their beliefs about their ability to succeed, change things around. And the same group of people who were called incompetent by customers went from number 11 to number 2 in those 13 cable systems in just a year and a half. And that's when I was sold that people can change. They can change their beliefs, they can change their thinking, and they can elevate.
And it takes leadership, right?
It does.
It takes leadership. It takes folks being on the same page or having common interests, which, again, because of our sports background, we're able to understand that, right? It might be a little bit difficult for others who didn't participate in a team sport. Again, I said this earlier, if they participated in band, which is a group sport, and other sports, they probably get it. I did not, so I'm not going to speak on them, but I know based on my experience and what we were taught, coaches are basically teachers, and you had a Hall of Fame teacher, right? Coach Massimino, if I'm not mistaken, came from that tree of coaches to Villanova from Penn. Am I right?
That's right. He was Chuck Daly's assistant. He recruited me.
So, give me some more nuggets about, how sports and the foundation of sports can help folks achieve and accomplish some of their goals based on what they're taught.
Well, the University of Pennsylvania, what I did was Power Thinking was formed a few years back, and we acquired a company called Reflective Learning that had the intellectual property rights to material that came out of Penn's Positive Psychology Center, where they've done decades and decades of research around, what makes people fall into a state of learned helplessness, where even even though they can succeed, they don't believe that they can. After repeated setbacks or suffering from a traumatic event, people can actually learn to be helpless. And then they started to study the opposite, that they can learn to be optimistic. But these are the things that those of us that participated in sports, we kind of learn that, because you can have incredible setbacks. You may start off, 5 games, first 5 games, you win them. You're not winning. You're losing by a lot. Everybody's questioning the team, questioning the coach, and you have to pull together and figure it out and bounce back.
Absolutely.
So what's interesting is that when I look at what I acquired when it comes to these strengths that were identified by Penn's Positive Psychology Center, that such that if people possess these strengths at a high level, if they're strong in these areas, these 7 areas, they're more likely to bounce back faster from adversity. And when I looked them over, I thought, boy, this is what Coach Daly and my teammates, what we all experienced and what we all learned from. So the first is, and I want you to think about a recent incident that's been televised nationally. It dealt with Juwan Howard, right? The head coach basketball, Michigan, goes in, they're doing the line at the end, shaking hands and so forth. And he and the head coach of Wisconsin have this scuffle and he's suspended now. But as I go through these inner strengths, you think about not only that incident, but, sports in general and life in general, not just sports, but life, but the things that we kind of learn in sports. The first is emotion regulation. If we're strong in emotion regulation, the ability to stay calm under pressure, there's a good chance that we can bounce back from any adversity faster. And so I asked you, since it's recent, to think about that incident where, a little bit of a mini brawl broke out. And now, Coach Juwan Howard's going to be suspended. He won't be able to coach for the rest of the season. And who knows what's going to come after that. Emotion regulation. The things that he teaches is, his
control your emotions, right? That's what
right.
we were learning. Control your emotions.
Control it. Second is impulse control. It's related to emotion regulation. And that is the ability not to say or do the first thing that comes to mind. So think about what happened in that line. When the coach approached him and put his hand in his chest, and of course, one thing led to another. The ability to control that his impulse to go, I'm going to hit this guy.
Right.
I want to, but I'm not going to do it because I'm in control. He lost it. Next is empathy, the ability to understand another person's experiences and emotions. Fourth is a big one, self-efficacy, the belief that you have control over your ability to succeed. And of course, in sports and in life, that is absolutely essential. And in sports, of course, if you don't believe that you can make that play, you can hit a foul shot, or you can, tackle this star player, whatever it is, in band that you can, come up with the most spectacular music, you're in trouble. So self-efficacy, the belief that you have control over your success, is important. Now, related to that is the fifth inner strength, which is optimism. And that is the view that no matter what goes on, that ultimately there's going to be a successful outcome. In basketball, we may be down 20 points at halftime. And I had this happen when I coached a group of kids, my boys, this team, where we're playing in an AAU tournament, and my guys weren't that talented. And we were faced with this team out of New York, the first matchup. They were bigger and stronger. And I told my guys what to expect. We're down by 17 at halftime. And I told them, look, we're going to get there one play at a time. We stop them. We score. We just take our time. We're going to do it. And I had them believing, and I can confess to you that I wasn't sure, but I told them, you guys can do it. And I'm like, oh my God, we don't. And I kind of kicked myself afterwards because we wound up winning by 1 point. The guys were all excited. I'm like, oh my God, we did it. They actually believed me that I believed in them, and they believed in themselves, and they were optimistic that no matter what was going on, they were going to win that game. Next is causal analysis, a systematic way of getting to the root cause of a situation and problem. And finally, the seventh inner strength that most people feel is a weakness, but it's actually a strength, and that's reaching out. reaching out for help. When you're faced with a setback, what many people do is they'll go in that fetal position, they'll withdraw. Folks were reaching out to them. Hey, I haven't heard from you. Everything okay? I'll get back to you when I'm feeling a little better. Now's not a good time to talk. When it is the time to talk, the time to text, the time to take action as opposed to doing nothing. That is one of the biggest issues, I think, that globally. I found this in Tokyo and in Beijing. No matter where you are in the world, people have the same experiences. They may speak different languages, there may be different cultures, but deep down, every single person can get better at those inner strengths and can bounce back from adversity faster.
Well said. Well said. Awesome. Farron,
So
Joe, anything?
I'm going to jump in a couple of things that you said. I love the perspective that you gave in regard to how the civil rights movement wasn't really so far removed from modern history. My background is in public safety and criminal justice, and when I remember probably about 10 years ago, when the police, there was such a disparity in the perspective of police officers and the inner city populations, and that led to, this was probably when the beginning of when it became a spotlight in the police shootings. I mean, granted, it's been going on for quite a long time, and I remember the police officers were saying they're disrespected going into those communities, and the criminals, the gang members, were saying, we're mistreated. There's not an equitable distribution of sentencing, and just the whole divide there. And I remember a criminologist came in and spoke to the law enforcement, a renowned criminologist from John Jay, and he came in and he said, the police officers were saying, I wasn't alive in that time. It's not, it's maybe it was my ancestors, but it's not me. And the criminologist said, and it really changed the perspective of the room. And he said, no, you may not have been alive at that time, but you're not bearing the brunt of that responsibility. But you have to acknowledge that happened, and you may have there are people alive today who may have seen their grandparents lynched, and that you have to say, no, I wasn't there, but I acknowledge that period, and what can I do today moving forward to make a difference and have a positive impact. And I think that it really changed the perspective of the law enforcement officials in that room, and it really was a turning and a stepping stone, at least in the state of New York, to try to bring in some procedural justice and really look at the landscape of that. So I love that you had said, it's not so far removed. I mean, people think that it was, the 1960s or, but really it's not that long ago.
No, you're right. I mean, yeah, you're right about that. I mean, I remember, I grew up in the 60s. When you look at the Wonder Years, the first Wonder Years program and the second Wonder Years, what's common about them is that the subject was 10 years old, 12 years old in sixth grade in 1968. And that was me. So I remember when John F. Kennedy was killed. I remember the March on Washington. I remember when, Malcolm X and Dr. King was killed. So again, it really wasn't that long ago. But the most important thing with folks who say, well, that was so long ago, it wasn't in my time. It happened way back when. The important thing to remember I talked about deep-rooted beliefs. Our deep-rooted beliefs about who we are relative to other people, who we are in the world, about what the world is all around, about what we feel about other cultures and countries, were set by the time we were 8 years old. We didn't come up with them ourselves. We all know where they come from. The people who we were closest to during that period. And we're influenced by when we're not even 1 year old yet. And we're influenced about as it relates to, who we are. Are we loved? Are we not loved? I mean, babies can sense that. and when they listen to their parents and they take cues from their parents. So while folks may not have been around, there have been beliefs that have been passed down from generation to generation to generation, which says, here's who you are in society, and here's where these other folks are. I'm in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania right now, and I was told when I came out, there's one thing you need to understand, Stan, and that is East Shore, West Shore. And I go, East Shore, West Shore. There's the Susquehanna River, and Harrisburg sits on the Susquehanna River. Across the Susquehanna River is an entirely different world. The city of Harrisburg, significant numbers of African Americans and minorities. You cross the river, and I remember a person that I worked with said to me, he said, there was this great basketball player at this Catholic school, and it's kind of funny because he saw him, he was the only one on the team, and they recruited him, of course. And he said, yeah, it was interesting seeing him because you don't see Black people on the West Shore. I'm like, okay. Now, he needed to listen to what he was saying. Why did that happen? How could that have happened? Do you think that people who were African American wanted to stay on the East Shore, or they just wanted to be wherever they needed to be? So we know the history of redlining and things of that nature. While they may have changed, those laws, the beliefs that people had about where they would live and where other people would live remain the same. I'll give you one last thing on that one. In '67, we moved from North Philadelphia, which was predominantly Black, to West Oak Lane. And our family was the first Black family on the block. And I'd never been around, people who didn't look like me before, a different race. What was interesting was that within a year and a half, the whole block was African American. Within a year and a half. And the strange thing about it is that I never saw a moving truck. I never saw a moving truck. So there were beliefs about me. Now, I did fairly well. My brother was 25 years on the Philadelphia Police Department, right? And another brother worked in retail. Another brother two brothers that worked in radio. A sister wound up being a jazz promoter in Charlotte, North Carolina, and for the Carolinas. So what was it about us that people, when we came to the neighborhood, they bolted? It was their beliefs about people that had the color skin that we had, and the overgeneralizations. This is overgeneralizing is a thinking trap. That's one of the skills of resilience, avoiding thinking traps. When we jump to conclusions about something, where we may mind read, where we think we know what the other person's thinking. How many times does that happen in relationships and so forth? Will we beat ourselves up too much? We personalize, or we externalize, we blame others. But the big one is overgeneralizing, where we paint, it could be not just people, but experiences with a broad brush. For salespeople, because with Aflac, I help train salespeople not to get in their own way. If they have, they're making phone calls, cold calls, they get 10 no's in a row on a Monday. I've had people that'll overgeneralize and say, well, Mondays is just not a good day to call. I'm just going to get no's on a Monday. I mean, these are the things that we just do naturally. And it certainly, applies to, what we experience with race. But, these thinking traps apply in every aspect of our lives.
Great.
Well done. Great information. Great information. Ferris, you got a question for Stan?
I don't have a question. I definitely, just like I'm sure you can, Bo, can relate to the 7 factors that you mentioned. I train young kids in baseball, and there are quite a few things that I tell them all the time, and one of them is control your emotions, especially when it comes to the hitting. But then you mentioned, your team playing this team from New York, and they're overmatched. and you don't even believe what you're saying. But what is it? It's the power of suggestion, right? It's you putting it into them and telling them they can do it, and them believing and trusting in you so much that they just go on out there and they compete, and next thing you know, they win a game that they probably never would have won in the first place. So all great points, and then the one I never thought about is the impulse control. And you mentioned Juwan Howard, and it kind of made me chuckle a little bit, because with that impulse control, you could see Juwan Howard was trying to walk by him. He was trying to avoid it, and the other coach stopped him. And right at that point, impulse control was gone. You know what I mean? And he was trying to do it, but he didn't allow him to. So it's funny how human nature comes into play there, depending on what goes on. So I thought that was very interesting. Those 7 points. I'm going to keep those in mind.
Yeah,
Well,
great.
as my mother would say, and if my Irish twin sister is still on, she'll second my motion. But my mom used to say, when you lose your temper, boy, you better go find it before I do. Right? So it's all about controlling your emotions. And we're not perfect at it, but we have to keep working at it. We have to keep practicing. Building relationships is not a one-time thing. You have to continue to practice, right? Organizations out there, corporations out there have a thing called best practices, right? Stan, I think you and I talked about this.
Yep.
Well, they don't best practice enough. They do their best practices once a quarter for HR training. No, best practices should be practiced like we practice every day. You can't get better unless you're practicing every day, right? So,
Right.
or at least practicing every day in season, right? So, right. But you have to be doing something related to what your ultimate goal is, right? So if you're looking to build relationships, if you're looking to build a coalition, you can't just be a one-hit wonder. You have to continue to work on it. So listen, Stan.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Stan.
I'm sorry. And I was going to say, and I think that's where that athlete mindset really comes into play, because as athletes, we have the ability to bring ourselves back a lot of the times where we may start to get off track, but then we have an ability, based on everything that we've learned and everything that's been put in us over all those years, to really get ourselves back on track. And with that competitive mindset, to be able to, really accomplish things that maybe some others wouldn't. So it's very valuable.
Self-discipline.
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in here because I'm a huge mindset geek. I'm all about it. And I know that Adrian and Bodine and always have the athletic connection, but it's much more broad than that. Of course, I mean, all of those principles could go across the board in life. It doesn't have to be an athlete's perspective. I think it can be a mother's perspective. It can be a professional perspective, a corporate perspective. All of those things, I think that self-awareness and internal dialogue and all of those things factor into that as well. So I just want to put a shout out to the non-athletes. They can be very useful and very instrumental in impacting the lives of everyone across the spectrum, in my opinion.
Oh,
No,
no,
it is
Absolutely.
a fact. It's a fact, and it's a great
Absolutely.
point, Joe. I mean, we certainly, the athletes are talking from an athletic perspective, but the reality is, you take something like emotion regulation and impulse control, relationships. When you look at relationships that fall apart, most of it started with poor emotion regulation and impulse control that escalated, and before you know it, folks, they're separated and they don't know what the heck happened. In school with teacher, the child. I mean, all of this is about every single aspect of our lives, and so those were the strengths. But how do you get stronger? There's skills, as I mentioned. But there's this skill of avoiding thinking traps. There are 8 thinking traps. What we try to do is we help people to practice, just as in, if you want to be a great trombone player or piano player, you have to practice. In athletics, even though you know what you're doing, you still have to practice. But there's very few places where you can practice the skills that build your strengths in the areas identified. And what we do with Power Thinking is we weekly, even though we should be practicing daily, but we get together weekly on just a 30-minute call, and we'll focus on a specific area. Like overgeneralization. I'll send out a video on a Tuesday night. On a Wednesday morning, we'll have 80 to 100 people on a call where we'll kind of talk about that. We'll reinforce this stuff. It's repetitive, and it kind of follows the model of TV commercials, where you just kind of repeating the same thing over and over again. I mean, we can all remember, in the 80s, I believe it was Wendy's.
Where's the beef?
What is it?
Yeah, where's the beef?
Where's the beef? Yeah.
It's not because they said it once and then we say, I'm going to remember that. That's really catchy. It was over and over and over and over again.
Oh, I remember the woman. It was a grandmother. Where's the beef?
That's right. Now, my era, going back when I was a kid, there was one. It was a cigarette commercial.
Oh yeah.
And it started off, Winston tastes good. And then people who remember those commercials were able to finish it. The jingle was, Winston tastes good like a cigarette should. Wasn't grammatically correct, but it was powerful, and folks remember. And so we do that. We follow that, even though it's only once a week. We found that when people are on those calls for 6 months, they find themselves responding differently to life's adversities. It's really amazing. And we have this one skill called the skill of ABC, learning the ABCs. And the ABC is discovered by a psychologist by the name of Dr. Albert Ellis. He's one of the fathers of what's called cognitive. Joe, you may kind of relate to this, cognitive behavioral therapy. You probably heard of that.
I have.
He's considered one of the fathers of that. He came up with this thing called ABC. And that is the relationship between the adversity you experience, the belief about that adversity, which then drives the C, which is the consequence or the negative emotion. And real quick, I'll give a quick example that everybody can relate to. And we give this example every time because most people go through this. So when you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off, the adversity, the A, is being cut off. And most people go from A to C. The C being that consequence or the negative emotion, which is usually anger. But what they fail to realize was that there was a B involved. There was a belief about being cut off that got them to anger. The belief was that this person violated you, that they violated your rights. And when that belief happened, whenever you feel that or believe that somebody violated your rights, you're going to come back. So I'm angry that they did this to me. Now, the reality is that person may not have even seen you. I know I've cut people off and I didn't do it intentionally. They may have gotten them into the blind spot, or, oh, I saw my exit. Oh my gosh, my exit's coming up. Let me move. And then somebody go, they're blowing the horn. And I'm like, oh my goodness, sorry, I didn't mean it. And they're going like this, or even worse, they just have their finger up. And so I had no intention of doing that to a person, but they believed that I did. But so if we change the belief about the adversity that we experience, we can actually eliminate the negative emotion or reduce it significantly. And so in that case, instead of thinking to ourselves or believing that this person intentionally did this to us, maybe the person was in a rush, didn't see us, was in a rush to get to a meeting, or a loved one was in the hospital. So we changed that belief. Hey, I'm not angry anymore. And think about what happens if this is in the morning, what happens to the rest of your day? How many people come into work and said, man, you wouldn't believe what happened to me this morning. I'm driving into work. I'm feeling good. I'm ready for a great day. This person cut me off. We got into it. I rolled down the window. I was yelling. They were yelling. And now my whole day is messed up. All of this could be avoided And that's what I'm so excited about with what we do, because we help people build these mental skills so that, they can be more on an even keel, and they're not going through all of those sharp, ups and downs like a roller coaster emotionally.
And I would say not 100%, but I like the analogy of replacing that example that you used about the guy that cut off. Throw in race relations. Not everything is what it appears to be.
That's a great point.
Take a step back and think, be patient, analyze the situation, right? Don't just fly off the handle and assume someone did something to you on purpose. Sure, there are people out there that do things on purpose, but not everyone does something on purpose. Sometimes it's a simple mistake. Allow them to apologize, or allow yourself to take a step back and go, maybe it was just an accident or it was a misunderstanding, and then go from A, B, and C. That makes sense, Stan?
That's right. Sure does. Yeah,
Okay.
Great job.
Boom.
Great job.
Let's wrap it up, baby. Great Black History Month program. Stan brought us home.
Yeah, but I told you, saving the best for last. Don't tell Sonia I said that. And I know she won't see it because she's in bed by now. So
Now, Joel, tell Sonia that guy was terrible. That last guy, he was absolutely horrible. You were the greatest.
Well, listen,
I appreciate
Stan,
the opportunity. This was really great. Thank you.
And it was last minute, so I really absolutely appreciate you coming on. I look forward to continuing to build a great relationship with you. We'd love to have you back. Don't hesitate to ask. It was great to have you.
Anytime. And check us out at www.powerthinkingcorp.com. A box will pop up. You can actually put in your email address and name, and you'll get 30 free affirmations. A few days later, you'll get that summary of the 7 inner strengths of resilience, and then the 7 skills. And I didn't get a chance to go over all of them, but you'll get that free, over the course of about 10 days or so. So feel free to do that. And thank you again for this opportunity, Joe, Adrienne, Bodine. This has been a real pleasure.
thank you for us as
Thank
well.
you, Stan. We appreciate it.
Yep.
Good deal.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye. All right, great. So, yeah. So closing thoughts. So, I mean, what do you think? I think we had a great program, very, very diverse and different perspectives all across the genre of really society, history, life, athletics, but not just limited to that. So we kind of went off course. Our last 2 programs, well, not our last program, but I mean our last 2 specials. So, it's been a great event. What do you think, A?
I think it was a great show. I learned a lot. Great conversation. I liked seeing how our viewers got engaged when Sonia was on in that specific conversation. I saw some, comments on the side too that we didn't post. So I think it was a great show. Looking forward to do something like this again. Loved it.
Me too.
Well, we have to reveal the good news.
Oh, all right.
I forgot to do it in the first when we first logged on, but go ahead. We've got some breaking news, folks.
Yeah, we do have some breaking news. So the Mo and Joe show is going to be, we're going to be in our Wednesday. We'll be back at our typical time slot, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But for the people like myself who would prefer to go to bed a little bit earlier, following in the first week of March, we're moving our time slot to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that doesn't mean we're going to go on and talk for 3 hours now like we did tonight, but but we're hopefully be able to get some people in bed a little bit earlier. So that we're looking forward to that. We think it's closer to prime time and a little bit perspective. And I think Adrian's right. I mean, I didn't get to all the comments like I typically do because I'll show this comment. Yay, San's ready to go to bed a little bit earlier. She's like myself, but let's roll back. I mean, we're into it a little bit, and I'm not necessarily. I don't want to open up the conversation again, but as I'm thanking our viewers, I'll roll back some of those comments. First of all, I want to thank. We have some people on. Daniel Hernandez tuned in. He did not comment, and Janet Nally, she didn't comment. Lynn Aducci Leonard. So we have some people here. Mr. Sanders put up an angry face. I'm assuming that was a mistake.
and hold on. Let me stop you. Lynn is a Nova grad, so V's up for Lynn. She said she was going to appear. She was going to watch the program. She kept her word. Go ahead.
And she did. So on the side, we have San, of course. Thank you for tuning in. Justin, Mr. Sanders. I didn't get to, let's see. I got all of Justin's comments. And I apologize, Justin. I know that you commented and you had a lot of sports categories, but we weren't really going that route tonight, our typical genre. Dave tuned in, and we appreciate it. Lori Greer, and we had Coach Andy, Kelvin. Kelvin, I did want to show this. Kelvin said going to school with Adrian and Lori. I agree. There was definitely different experiences, and we appreciate that. Lori also said reading Waking Up White by Debbie Irving. It's a book that is helpful to understand how race and racism is there, but we don't always understand how it shapes us in our perspectives. And thank you. So thank you. And then who else? We have Justin, Will Polston tuned in, and I apologize. Will asked us, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit on the Bo and Joe show. He's saying there are a lot of historical Black Americans, but who are some that really influenced you all? Athletes, actresses, musicians. So we'll cover that. Let's talk about that a little bit on Bo and Joe. That's something for us, a segment that we can do because obviously football's over. So we'll have a little bit of time, and that's a great topic actually, because it'll be our last show in February. So, it will be interesting to see who inspires me. I'm going to throw it out there already, and I wanted to put it out there when Rich was speaking about all of the prominent athletes in Philadelphia. And I'm privileged to be on with two men who inspire and motivate me and every day, or not every day, every week, Adrian and Bodine. So I appreciate your company. And who else?
Well, I'm going to hold my book up for Lori. Lori, if you want to read a great book, pick mine up. Pick mine up, Lori.
And so Mr. Sanders is clarifying. He did not mean to put up an angry face. So I appreciate it. And of course, we want to thank our guests. We had Sonia here, Sonia Tanksley. So anybody who's looking for an attorney in Manhattan, I encourage you to reach out to Sonia. She's a great attorney. And of course, we had Lou Allegra and Stan Green and Rich Pagano. And I forgot to tell Rich that one of my favorite teachers' names, I think my second grade teacher, was Miss Pagano. I adored her. So, and of course, thanks to everybody on the panel. And of course, the night, Chris P. Bacon hung on in behind the scenes for over 2.5 hours. We're going on 3 hours. It could be a record for him. He also crafted that nice Black Lives Matter, Black History Month banner in the background. And so we appreciate that.
And with the what do you call this? The running banner at the bottom.
And the running banner at the bottom. I'd like to do that every week on the Bo and Joe show. I want to learn how to do that. So we'll talk about that behind the scenes. I love that banner.
Well, he also helped me with getting Rich set up. So while you were engaged with your conversation with Sonia, he stepped up to the plate. So thanks, Crispy Bacon. You're the man.
You're the man. And so, this was literally, we're at what, 2 hours and 45 minutes? Adrian, you said to reserve you 15 minutes, and look at you want the whole duration. And you know what? And I know it's Black History Month, but I think this is such an important topic of conversation. And it's hard to do it when we have so many guests. I mean, we obviously couldn't have this type of program on a regular basis, but maybe it's a segment that we want to think about introducing on the Bo and Joe Show, having, some a different type of guest. And I know Bodine and I have spoken about this in the past, and because it really opens up and enlightens the conversation. I mean, I felt a little bit of pressure knowing that we had guests in the wings, and I didn't necessarily get to fully evolve the conversations as much as I would have liked to. But, especially now that we're moving down to 9 p.m., we could really have a 90-minute show, and we usually have a 90-minute show anyway, and dedicate some time to some of the people who have inspired us. And since we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, I don't think we necessarily have to limit it to Black Americans, but any Americans in any race and gender that inspire and motivate and move us.
Well, 9 o'clock, and you're thinking, great minds think alike. I'll piggyback off of that. 9 o'clock allows us to do more. It allows us to reach more, and it's going to allow us to invite more. So stay tuned, folks. This thing's about to really get busy. And so I'm looking forward to it. 9 o'clock is a great thing. And that was your idea. So kudos to the superstar for making that happen.
And, we weren't going to talk about, we did talk about sports a little bit, but Justin has a comment in there and we didn't display any of his comments. And I think that this is important to point out since it just happened yesterday and I watched it. But Bubba Wallace, congrats for him for coming in second in the Daytona 500. So I was hoping he was going to come in first. He was in the running for a bit, but he didn't quite make it. So we appreciate all that. And thanks, Andy. Andy saying great show. We appreciate everybody. So thanks, we'll Andy. See you. We'll see everybody Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, our typical time. So come in and help us say goodbye to that time slot for now. So thanks, Chris. You can play us out.
Beads up. Thanks, everybody.